Welcome. I know you're here to fall asleep to some chilling stories, and don't worry, you'll be dozing off in no time. You're in the perfect spot. Before we start, make sure to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. We'd love to know what story you like the most. And don't worry about the brightness. We've got a black screen to keep things nice and calming for your sleep. Now get comfy, close your eyes, and let's dive into hours of eerie tales to help you drift off. When I asked him why he was always there, he simply smiled and said, "You told me to come." But I had never met him before. I've always been a creature of habit, especially when it comes to my morning coffee. Every weekday at 7:30 a.m., I walk 2 blocks from my apartment to the Sunrise Cafe. They serve a perfect double-shot latte, smooth, not too bitter, and the baristas don't mistake my name for anything else. I usually sit by the large window that overlooks the street, a seat that allows me to wake up slowly as I watch the world pass by. The first time I saw him, I didn't think much of it. He was sitting at the corner table, staring out the window with a look of quiet thoughtfulness. He had a neatly trimmed beard, wore a charcoal gray sweater, and had a small notebook in front of him. I remember thinking he looked vaguely familiar in the way strangers sometimes do, like a face you might have seen in passing or glimpsed on social media. But after a few mornings, I noticed something odd. Every time I came in, he was already there. He'd watch me order, watch me sit, and whenever I glanced in his direction, he'd lock eyes with me. It was unsettling, as though he was waiting for something. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just another regular, someone who kept a similar schedule. But the way he stared was anything but casual. By the end of the week, I could no longer ignore it. He appeared every morning, always at the same table, always with that same expectant gaze. I thought about approaching him, but some irrational fear held me back. I convinced myself it would be embarrassing if he turned out to be innocently minding his own business. So I let it go for a while longer. Monday rolled around again, and sure enough, he was there. This time, though, the cafe was packed, and the only free seat was one directly next to him. I felt my stomach tighten with apprehension, but I needed my morning coffee, and there was nowhere else to sit. Heart pounding, I made my way over. "Is this seat taken?" I asked, forcing politeness. He looked up, smiled calmly, and closed his notebook. "No, please." His voice was quiet, polite, and it sent a small shiver through me. His eyes seemed to reflect some hidden amusement, as if he knew a secret I didn't. I sat down, sipping my latte, trying not to fidget. Silence stretched between us. Eventually, I gave in to curiosity. "I see you here a lot," I said, my voice trembling more than I'd like. "Do you come here every day?" He turned his full attention to me then. "Yes," he said, "every day." "Why?" I blurted. "I mean, do you work in the area, or—" He paused as though considering how much to reveal. Then he said, "I come here because you told me to." I laughed in disbelief. "What? That makes no sense. I've never spoken to you before." My pulse quickened as his calm expression remained unchanging. His reply sent a chill skittering down my spine. When I asked him why he was always there, he simply smiled and said, "You told me to come." But I'd never met him before. For a moment I was speechless, recognizing my own words echoed back at me. Or had I imagined hearing them? Something about the way he said it made me feel like time had collapsed in on itself. It was as if I had indeed told him to come, though I couldn't recall it. The barista called out another customer's name, breaking the tension momentarily. "Sorry, that's not possible," I managed. "I think you have me confused with someone else." He tilted his head ever so slightly. "Do I?" I looked around, half hoping someone was pranking me. The cafe hummed with normalcy, people chatting, laptops open, espresso machines hissing. Yet I felt as though I'd fallen into a parallel world where logic no longer applied. I left that day without finishing my coffee. My chest felt tight and my thoughts whirled like an endless echo chamber. Over the next few days, I tried changing my routine, going to a different cafe, arriving earlier or later. Each time I'd feel a sense of relief when he wasn't there. But the following Monday, compelled by some mix of curiosity and dread, I walked back into Sunrise Cafe. My heart sank when I spotted him again at his usual table. This time he didn't even have a coffee in front of him. He just sat there, notebook closed, eyes alert. I was halfway to the exit when he called out my name, my full name. I froze. I'd never told him who I was, never even worn a name tag or anything that could have given me away. "How do you know my name?" I asked, voice trembling. He simply patted the chair next to him as though it was the most natural invitation in the world. "Sit," he said. "I want to show you something." Every instinct told me to run, but some strange force compelled me to accept. I walked over and lowered myself into the chair. He opened his notebook and turned it toward me. To my astonishment, I saw pages upon pages of entries, dates, times, and notes describing my every move in the cafe. The first entry was dated 3 months ago, well before I had even started coming here regularly. "This is insane," I whispered, feeling sick. He flipped to a page near the beginning. There, in handwriting that looked disturbingly like mine, was a message. "Meet me at the Sunrise Cafe every morning at 7:30. I need you there." It was signed with my initials. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "Why is my handwriting in your notebook?" His expression was disconcertingly calm. "It's what you wrote," he said. "You don't remember?" I shook my head vigorously. I was sure I'd never seen this notebook before, let alone written in it. Yet there was an eerie familiarity to the scrawl on the page. My stomach knotted. Had I lost my mind? I pushed away from the table, my breathing ragged. "This is some kind of trick," I said. "Stay away from me." He didn't follow, didn't even stand up, just watched me leave with those dark, unwavering eyes. My hands shook as I hurried back to my apartment, thoughts spiraling. That night, I dreamed I was in the cafe again. Everything was dim, as though seen through tinted glass. The only clear figure was the man, sitting at a table lit by a single overhead lamp. He held the notebook, tapping a pen against the page. I stood paralyzed, unable to move or speak. Then he pointed to the seat across from him, and somehow I was compelled to sit. My hand moved of its own accord, writing something in that notebook, words I couldn't read but recognized as my own. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. Had I written those messages in some half-conscious state? Was the man simply a hallucination, or was something else at play? Unable to shake the sense of dread, I confronted the possibility that maybe I had, in some moment of madness, told him to come. But why? And how could I possibly have forgotten such a thing? Despite my fear, I found myself drawn back to the cafe the next day. I needed answers. Walking inside felt surreal, like stepping into the set of a horror movie. And there he was, as though he'd never left. He didn't greet me, nor did he open his notebook. He simply watched with that same quiet expectation. I approached cautiously, half expecting him to vanish. He didn't. "I need to know," I said, voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" He placed a single sheet of paper on the table. I picked it up. It was an old letter, the edges yellowed with age. The stationery was identical to what I used to own as a teenager. Written on it were words that made my blood run cold. "I want you to find me. Sit with me. Wait for me until I arrive." At the bottom was my full name and a date, 10 years ago. Shaking my head in denial, I said, This can't be real." He looked at me with something akin to sympathy. "It's real if you believe it to be. You asked me to come so many times. Through your notes, your thoughts, your dreams." I felt lightheaded, as though the walls of the cafe were closing in. "I don't understand," I whispered. "What are you?" He reached out, but I recoiled. His hand stopped in midair. "I am the one you created," he murmured. "The one you called again and again, even when you forgot." I wanted to scream, to call him a liar, but no sound came out. Memories, half-forgotten dreams from my youth, flickered in the back of my mind. Stories I wrote about a mysterious figure in a coffee shop, a visitor who'd wait for me each morning. I'd penned them in secret journals, fantasies of companionship. Could this be some manifestation of those fantasies? "I don't want this," I said finally, tears pricking my eyes. He stood, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty in his face. "You summoned me. If you truly don't want me here, you must stop calling me. Stop thinking of me." I stumbled away, leaving him standing in the cafe. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself out into the daylight. After that, I tried to erase him from my mind. I stopped going to Sunrise Cafe, canceled my morning routines. Each time I caught myself thinking of him, I'd shut the thought down, refusing to give it power. Weeks passed without incident. No strange sightings, no notes in my handwriting. I started to believe I'd imagined the whole thing, that maybe I was under too much stress. But late one night, I found a slip of paper tucked under my door. It was blank except for a single sentence. "You told me to come." My blood ran cold. I tore it up and tossed it in the trash, telling myself it was a prank or a coincidence. Yet the uneasy feeling remained, a shadow lurking at the edge of my thoughts. I can't say I've ever truly escaped him. Sometimes I dream of that cafe, see him sitting at his table, notebook open. I try to forget, to push him away, but the more I force it, the more he seems to slip into my subconscious. Is he really there waiting for me? Or is he just a manifestation of my own regrets, my own abandoned stories coming back to haunt me? I don't go to Sunrise Cafe anymore, and maybe that's for the best. Sometimes, though, I can't help but wonder if I'm the only one who sees him, or if others notice a quiet stranger scribbling in a notebook, staring at an empty chair, waiting for someone who told him to come, someone who can't remember ever doing so. We thought we were alone, but someone had been watching us the entire time. When my fiancé Andrew and I found the listing for a Victorian-style cottage on the outskirts of town, we thought we'd struck gold. The pictures were breathtaking. A wraparound porch with a swing, high ceilings, wooden floors that gleamed in the sunlight. And the rent was unbelievably low, especially for a place so cozy. It felt like fate. We moved in at the start of spring. Everything smelled of fresh paint, and the landlord told us he'd just installed new fixtures and appliances. We spent our first night in sleeping bags, toasting with plastic cups of cheap champagne. I remember feeling a surge of optimism, imagining a bright future in our perfect little rental. For the first couple of weeks, things were blissful. We marveled at how quiet the neighborhood was. No noisy neighbors, no traffic. Andrew set up his office in the den, and I turned the small reading nook upstairs into my personal haven. The only odd thing was the landlord's frequent check-ins. His name was Mr. Kavanaugh, a tall, thin man with a sharp nose and a polite but unsettling smile. He'd show up unannounced, telling us he was just making sure everything's fine. Once I caught him in the backyard fiddling with the gutters. Another time, he was in the basement, claiming he needed to check the furnace. Each time, I felt a twinge of discomfort at his presence, but he never did anything overtly wrong. After a month, the honeymoon phase started to wear off. Andrew and I both began noticing strange things around the house. Lights flickering in rooms we weren't in, faint scratching noises behind the walls at night, and occasionally an odd whispering sound we couldn't pinpoint. Initially, we laughed it off, blaming old wiring or settling wood. But late one night, I was jolted awake by a high-pitched clicking noise. Andrew was asleep beside me, so I slipped out of bed and followed the sound down the hallway. It was coming from the wall near the door to the attic. I pressed my ear against the plaster, heart hammering. The clicking stopped. Then, as I turned to go back, I heard a distinct rhythmic tapping, almost like Morse code. I froze, but it soon faded into silence, leaving me unnerved and wide awake until morning. When we told Mr. Kavanaugh about the noises, he shrugged it off. "Old houses make old sounds," he said. "You'll get used to it." The next odd discovery happened when Andrew was rearranging furniture. He removed a dusty mirror from the wall in the hallway, and behind it, we found a small hole, a perfectly round hole leading into what looked like empty space between the walls. Peering in with a flashlight, Andrew gasped. There was a tiny camera lens embedded there, aimed directly at our bedroom door. We stared at each other in shock. Why would there be a camera hidden in our wall? We tore through the house, checking every nook and cranny, and sure enough, we found more. A small lens above the kitchen sink, another in the living room smoke detector, and one inside the overhead light fixture in our bedroom. Each lens was discreetly placed, nearly impossible to notice if you weren't specifically looking for it. I felt sick to my stomach. Someone had been spying on us, watching our private moments, hearing our conversations. We confronted Mr. Kavanaugh immediately, but he denied any knowledge. He acted appalled, swearing he'd call a professional to remove the previous owner's equipment. But something about his demeanor struck me as rehearsed. He seemed more annoyed than shocked, more eager to smooth things over than to get to the truth. Over the next few days, Andrew and I lived in a state of heightened paranoia. We couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even after we taped over the lenses and pulled out the ones we could reach. Every creak made our skin crawl. We started communicating in whispers, as if we were afraid of being overheard. At times, I caught glimpses of movement outside our windows at night. But when I rushed to look, no one was there. One morning, I decided I'd had enough. "We need to get out of here," I told Andrew firmly. "I don't feel safe." He hesitated. "We signed a lease," he said. "We'd lose our deposit if we leave now." I scoffed. "I'd rather lose money than my peace of mind. Think about it, Andrew. We thought we were alone, but someone had been watching us the entire time." My words seemed to strike a chord. He nodded, though reluctantly. We agreed to start looking for another place, no matter the financial cost. That very afternoon, Mr. Kavanaugh showed up unannounced again. This time he didn't bother with excuses. He simply appeared in the doorway, his expression serious. "I understand you found some devices," he said. "Let me assure you I had no idea they were there, but let's not be hasty." I crossed my arms. "Hasty? Those cameras didn't install themselves." He lowered his voice, glancing around as though someone might be listening. "I can offer a significant discount on next month's rent. It's the least I can do while this gets resolved." Andrew was torn. Part of him wanted to accept the discount while we scouted new places, but every instinct I had screamed that staying was dangerous. I insisted we move out immediately. We packed in a frenzy, piling boxes in the living room. But as if the house itself were fighting back, strange occurrences escalated. The lights flickered incessantly, doors slammed on their own, and we heard phantom footsteps creaking in the upstairs hall. That night, Andrew and I tried to sleep, fully dressed, ready to leave at dawn. A thunderstorm raged outside, lightning casting stark shadows across our bedroom walls. Around 2 a.m., I jolted awake. The bed was shaking. No, Andrew was shaking me. His face was pale. "Listen," he whispered. I strained my ears. From somewhere within the walls came a scrambling sound, followed by muffled voices, or maybe it was a recording, I couldn't be sure. I stepped onto the cold floor, heart pounding, and followed Andrew into the hallway. We traced the sound to a small door that led into the crawl space beneath the stairs. Andrew pried it open with a crowbar. Inside, we found a cramped, dusty space filled with electronic equipment, monitors, wires, and several small cameras hooked up to what looked like a makeshift control board. The screens displayed every room in our house, including the hallway we were standing in. The real-time footage on one monitor caught my eye. It showed a figure in the living room, facing away from the camera, wearing a long coat. My stomach lurched. "Who is that?" I whispered. Andrew peered closer. "I don't know." Fear turned my blood to ice. If both of us were in the hallway, who was in our living room? We tiptoed toward the living room door, adrenaline surging. The light was off, but the glow of lightning flashes lit up the furniture in harsh bursts. I could see the silhouette of someone standing by the window. Another flash illuminated the face. Mr. Kavanaugh. He stood there, unmoving, as if waiting for something or someone. My heart hammered in my chest. How had he gotten in? Did he have a key? Before we could confront him, he turned around and walked out through the front door, shutting it behind him without a sound. It was as though he knew we'd see him. Shaken, we rushed back to gather the last of our essentials. I wanted to leave right then, storm or not, but the driveway gate was locked, and the lock jammed when Andrew tried to open it. We had to climb over in the pouring rain, leaving our car behind. In that moment, all we cared about was escaping. We sprinted down the street, drenched and terrified, until we reached a 24-hour diner. There, we called a friend to pick us up. We spent the night at a motel, hearts still racing. The next morning, we returned with the police. But by then, the crawl space was empty. No monitors, no cameras, no sign of any surveillance equipment at all. The police took our statement, but with no evidence. It was our word against Mr. Kavanaugh's. He conveniently claimed he was on vacation that night, nowhere near the property. We never went back to that house, losing our security deposit and most of our furniture in the process. We crashed at Andrew's parents' place until we found another rental. For weeks, we feared Mr. Kavanaugh might track us down, but he never did, and I sometimes wonder if the perfect rental ad had already been reposted for new unsuspecting tenants. I still catch myself glancing over my shoulder, checking for hidden cameras in every new place we enter. It's become a habit now, one I can't shake. I can't help but wonder if someone, somewhere, is still watching the footage they recorded of us. Sometimes I dream about that living room monitor, still running in some hidden crawl space, replaying every intimate moment we thought belonged to us alone. I thought it was just harmless fun until the photos I never took of myself started showing up online. I've never liked online dating, but I was bored one weekend and downloaded an app just to see what it was like. My friends teased me, saying I was the last person to hop on that bandwagon. At first it was all innocent swiping and chatting. Then I noticed a series of cringe-worthy profiles, and for reasons I still can't fully explain, I created a fake account. It was meant to be a joke, a bit of fun to pass the time. I used some random models' photos and called myself Sabrina. I told myself I wasn't hurting anyone. I was just playing around. I matched with a guy who called himself Rogue Stone. He was older, seemed shy in his messages. We exchanged harmless banter, and I found myself strangely amused by the attention. When he started confessing personal details, his loneliness, how he felt misunderstood, I felt a pang of guilt, but I kept going, partially out of curiosity, partially because I was bored. Things took a turn when he asked if Sabrina could send more photos. I scoured the internet for pictures of the same model, making sure the settings matched the story I'd spun. He seemed excited, grateful even, telling me how beautiful I looked. I felt a twinge of discomfort, but again, I brushed it off. It was just the internet, right? I decided to end it after a few days. It was getting too intense, and I didn't want to lead him on. Before I could tell him the truth, though, he sent me a private message in a chilling tone. "I know what you're doing." My heart pounded. Did he suspect I was fake? I tried to block him, but the app glitched. I uninstalled it, hoping that would be the end of it. The next day, I woke up to a string of messages on my real social media accounts. Messages from Rogue Stone. Somehow, he'd found my real name, my real profile. He threatened to expose me, calling me a liar, a catfisher. I tried to ignore it, but the messages kept coming, each more menacing than the last. Then came the pictures. They appeared in my inbox, posted by a dummy account with captions like, "Look at this two-faced liar." Except the pictures weren't of Sabrina, they were of me. Photos I had never taken. In the first photo, I was lying in bed, wearing pajamas, hair a mess, staring blankly at my laptop. Except I had no memory of anyone taking that picture. In another, I was brushing my teeth at night. My toothbrush hung out of my mouth, foam dripping, eyes half shut in drowsiness. Again, I had never taken such a photo, and I lived alone. My apartment was locked. So how on earth did these photos exist? I felt violated and terrified. Each image depicted me in private moments. My living room at midnight, my kitchen at sunrise, my bathroom mirror as I stepped out of the shower. They were not explicit, but they were intimate enough to make my skin crawl. I rushed around my apartment searching for hidden cameras, checking every vent, every corner. I found nothing. Messages poured in, taunting me. "I see you've been busy. Nice pajamas. Maybe next time don't pretend to be someone else." I blocked every account, changed all my passwords, and even canceled my credit cards out of an abundance of caution. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat without feeling watched. It was as though he had a direct feed into my life. Finally, I went to the police, but they shrugged it off, saying online harassment is tricky to investigate. They gave me the usual advice about changing passwords, and being careful with suspicious links. I felt helpless. This person, whoever he really was, seemed to have unprecedented access to my most private moments, and I had no clue how. Then one afternoon I found a flash drive in my mailbox. No note, no return address. I plugged it into an old laptop, too paranoid to use my main device. On it was a single video file. I clicked it and my stomach lurched. It was footage of me, from the vantage point of my ceiling fan, sleeping in my bed. I watched in horror as the me on screen tossed and turned, clearly unaware of being filmed. The timestamp read 3:03 a.m. from 2 nights prior. I felt numb. How could I have been so careless? I tore apart my ceiling fan and sure enough, hidden behind one of the decorative covers was a tiny camera. I called the landlord, who insisted he had no idea. I demanded an immediate lock change and a full sweep of the apartment. He obliged, but that did little to calm my nerves. That evening I received another message from a brand new account. "You can remove the cameras, but I still have the footage. Next time, think before you mess with people." My head spun. Was this Rogue Stone or someone else entirely? Had I been targeted at random, or did my catfishing set this all in motion? Desperate, I posted a plea online, begging whoever was behind this to leave me alone. I admitted my wrongdoing. I had catfished someone, and it was wrong. I received a flood of sympathy, along with condemnation. Most people said it was a lesson learned. A handful said I deserved it. None of that helped me sleep at night. Then, more photos began appearing, ones that I truly feared would destroy my life if they went public. They weren't nudes, but they were close enough, capturing me in states of undress that felt deeply personal. Each time I saw them, I felt a fresh wave of horror and shame. I realized that if my catfisher wanted to ruin my life, he now had all the ammunition he needed. I decided I couldn't live like that anymore. I packed a bag, booked a motel room in another town under a friend's name, and vanished from my own life for a while. I left my phone behind, used a burner phone to contact the few people I trusted, and tried to vanish from social media. For a short time, it worked. No new photos, no new messages. But the anxiety remained. I jumped at every shadow, kept the curtains drawn, avoided eye contact with strangers. My friend suggested counseling, and I considered it, but I still felt the ghostly presence of that unseen watcher. Eventually, I returned to my apartment, determined to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. The locks were changed, and I'd had a security firm sweep the place for hidden devices. They assured me it was clean. I tried to rebuild my routines. Wake up, brush my teeth, make coffee, go to work, come home. For a while, nothing happened. My life seemed almost normal again. Then, one morning, I opened my email and found a single unread message from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "We're not done." My stomach dropped. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a single link. It led to a private image hosting site with dozens of new photos of me. Photos that must have been taken weeks or even months prior, from angles I didn't recognize. Some were labeled with vile comments, others with timestamps that reminded me exactly when I'd been alone and thought no one was watching. I closed my eyes, tears threatening to spill over. I whispered out loud, "I thought it was just harmless fun," until the photos I never took of myself started showing up online. That line echoed in my head, mocking me. I realized then that my catfisher might not be a single person. It could be multiple individuals in some twisted circle, or a group that traded footage as punishment for anyone who deceived them. The details mattered less than the reality that my privacy had been shattered. To this day, I don't know the full truth. I've changed my name on social media, avoided any dating apps, and keep to myself. A few close friends know what happened, but most think I just had a rough patch. Sometimes I wonder if the watchers have moved on, found a new target to torment. But every time I open my inbox, every time I see an unknown number calling, my heart still lurches with dread. They could come back at any moment. That's the worst part, not knowing if it's truly over or if they're just biding their time. I've tried to forget the fake persona I created, but Sabrina remains a haunting reminder of the door I opened, allowing a faceless watcher to slip into my life. In-laws. The landlord's only rule was, "Don't open the blue door." But on the last night, I couldn't resist. I moved into the old Victorian house on a rainy afternoon, lugging boxes up the narrow staircase. The landlord, Mr. Dempsey, was a kind, grandfatherly type who welcomed me with a warm smile and a ring of heavy keys. He walked me through the house's quirks, which windows stuck, which taps leaked. Finally, he led me to a narrow hallway with a single blue door at the end. "That one stays locked," he said, his voice surprisingly firm. "It's not included in the rental. Don't try to open it." I remember nodding, my curiosity immediately piqued. "Why? Is it just storage?" He shrugged. "It's empty," he said too quickly. "Just don't go in there." His tone brooked no argument. I decided not to push. After all, the rent was cheap, and the place was huge, with high ceilings and a charming fireplace. The first few weeks went by smoothly. The house had that classic old home ambiance, creaking floors, drafty windows. I worked long hours, so I seldom had time to dwell on the locked door, though it lingered in the back of my mind. Sometimes I'd glance down that hallway and feel a faint sense of unease, as if the door watched me. It was around the third week that I started noticing an odd smell near the hallway, a faint, musty odor that seemed to come and go. At first, I thought it might be mold in the walls. I called Mr. Dempsey, but he just repeated his one rule: "Leave the blue door alone." Then he changed the topic, brushing off my concerns. One stormy night, I was curled up in the living room with a book when the lights flickered. The thunder rattled the windows, and the house felt unnervingly alive. That was when I heard it, a soft scraping sound from somewhere upstairs. I paused, heart pounding, straining to hear through the din of rain. Another scrape, followed by a dull thud, as if something heavy was being dragged across the floor. I crept upstairs, carefully flipping on lights, calling out, "Hello?" No answer. The sounds led me toward the hallway with the blue door. My hand hovered over the doorknob, the landlord's warning echoing in my head. I tried the handle, locked of course. The scraping had stopped, and the hallway was eerily quiet. Shaken, I returned downstairs telling myself it was the storm, the wind, or perhaps the pipes rattling. From that point on, the house never felt entirely empty. I'd catch fleeting shadows at the corner of my vision, hear faint footsteps overhead when I knew I was alone. Each night I slept fitfully, plagued by dreams of that locked door. In one dream, I found the door wide open, revealing a dark corridor stretching infinitely, lined with dozens of identical blue doors. One morning, I noticed the landlord's car in the driveway at an odd hour. I peeked out the window to see him letting himself in with a key I hadn't known he had. By the time I went to greet him, he was gone, though I could have sworn I heard him slip upstairs. 5 minutes later, he hurried back out, head down, ignoring me completely. It was unsettling, to say the least. Over the next few days, the strange smell intensified. It was a pungent, rotten odor that seeped into the hallway. I worried something had died in the walls. I tried to call Mr. Dempsey again, but he didn't answer. My frustration grew. I was paying rent here. Didn't I have a right to know if there was something rotting behind that locked door? On my last night in the house, though I didn't know it would be my last at the time, the storm returned with a vengeance. Lightning flashed, illuminating the old wallpaper in harsh white bursts. The smell was almost unbearable now, and the scraping sounds were back, louder than ever. Every hair on my body stood on end as I climbed the stairs. My heart thudded in my ears. Standing before the blue door, I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to see what was in there, landlord's rule be damned. I tried the knob, still locked. Desperate, I ran to my kitchen for a screwdriver and hammer, returning to pry the lock open. My hands shook as I worked at the old brass doorknob. After several agonizing minutes, there was a click. The door creaked open a few inches. The smell hit me first, so powerful I nearly gagged. I covered my nose with my sleeve, shining a flashlight inside. The room was small, dusty, and cluttered with old furniture draped in sheets. Something shifted in the far corner. I froze, focusing the beam of light. I couldn't see clearly, but there was a shape, a hunched figure. My mind raced. Was it an animal, or worse? Then, with excruciating slowness, the figure turned toward me. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating a pale face, eyes wide with some mix of terror and madness. I stifled a scream. The figure was human, a woman, her hair matted, skin sallow, wrists bound by tattered cloth. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. It was as if she'd lost the ability to speak. My heart pounded violently. "Oh my God," I breathed. "Are you okay?" I stepped forward only to trip on something at my feet. Looking down, I realized it was a thick chain, bolted to the wall. This woman was chained in the room. My mind reeled, trying to piece together how this could be happening. Suddenly, a click behind me made me whip around. The door slammed shut, plunging the room into darkness. I heard the lock turn. I banged on the door, screaming, "Help! Let us out!" The only answer was the roar of thunder outside. My flashlight's beam trembled across the woman's gaunt features. She crawled toward me, her eyes wild. She grasped my arm, her nails digging into my skin. I fumbled for the doorknob in the darkness, panic surging. Minutes felt like hours. My mind raced through possibilities. Was Mr. Dempsey behind this? Had he locked us in? Why was this woman here, and how long had she been trapped? Then, abruptly, the door opened from the outside. There stood Mr. Dempsey, face pale. Before I could speak, he grabbed me by the arm and yanked me out of the room. I shouted for him to help the woman, but he shoved me aside. In the confusion, the flashlight fell to the floor. I caught one last glimpse of the woman's eyes reflecting the light, desperate and pleading. Mr. Dempsey forced the door shut and twisted the lock. "I told you not to open it," he hissed, voice shaking with anger or fear. "You had no right." Breathing hard, I backed away, adrenaline coursing through me. "There's a person. She's chained up. We have to help her." He shook his head vehemently. "It's not what you think," he muttered. "She belongs there. She's dangerous." I felt my stomach twist in revulsion. "You're insane. I'm calling the police." I turned to run, but he lunged at me, grabbing my wrist. I managed to wrench free and race downstairs. I could hear his footsteps thundering behind me. I screamed, hoping a neighbor might hear over the storm. By sheer luck, I made it outside, the cold rain soaking me instantly. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. Mr. Dempsey stood at the front porch, his face twisted in rage as the wind howled around us. He didn't chase me any farther. The police arrived in the midst of the downpour. I huddled under an umbrella, pointing them toward the house. They questioned Mr. Dempsey, then searched every room. Hours passed as they combed through the place. But when an officer emerged, he wore a puzzled expression. "There's no one in there," he said. "Just an empty storage room at the end of the hallway." I felt my blood run cold. "No, that can't be right. I saw her. I spoke to her." Mr. Dempsey stood silently, water dripping from his coat. I demanded to be taken back inside. The officers led me upstairs. The door was open now, revealing a dusty, empty room. No furniture, no chains, no sign of the woman at all, and no smell of decay. I was nearly hysterical, insisting I'd seen her. The police looked uncertain. They questioned Mr. Dempsey, but he stuck to his story. I'd broken the lock. He'd found me rummaging around an unused room. He even produced a lease agreement explicitly stating I wasn't allowed to open that door. My credibility began to crumble in their eyes. Eventually, the police left, suggesting I find another place to stay if I felt unsafe. I didn't argue. I grabbed my belongings and drove away in a daze, heart pounding. I never set foot in that house again. I still can't explain what I saw. Sometimes I dream about that woman's face. In the nightmares, she's crawling toward me, reaching out with those bony fingers, her eyes hollow with despair. I wake up drenched in sweat, unsure if it was all some elaborate trick or if I truly stumbled onto something monstrous, something Mr. Dempsey managed to hide so well that night. I've tried to move on, but sometimes I catch myself thinking about the last thing I heard him say as I fled down the stairs. "You should have listened. Some doors are locked for a reason." She smiled as she handed me the cookies, whispering, "Be careful about who you trust around here." I moved into the duplex on a crisp autumn afternoon, thrilled to finally have a place to call my own after years of rotating roommates. The exterior was unassuming, white siding, a small porch, and a shared driveway. It was quiet, too, set back from the busy roads and surrounded by tall maple trees that shed bright red leaves like confetti. I was convinced it would be the perfect spot for a fresh start. On my very first night, I heard a light knock on the door. Opening it, I found a petite woman with curly dark hair and an easy smile. She held out a plate of chocolate chip cookies, still warm from the oven. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said brightly. "I'm Bernice. I live on the other side." I grinned, touched by her thoughtfulness. "Thank you. I'm Claire." We chatted for a few minutes. She asked where I was from, told me about the local grocery store, and mentioned that she worked odd hours at the nearby hospital. Her warmth put me at ease. As I went to shut the door, she leaned in a little closer, her smile fading to something almost cautious. She smiled as she handed me the cookies, whispering, "Be careful about who you trust around here." Her tone made the hair on my arm stand on end. Before I could ask what she meant, she flashed a quick, apologetic smile, then vanished into her side of the duplex. That night, I found it hard to sleep. Bernice's warning rattled around in my head. Who shouldn't I trust? Was she talking about the landlord, the neighborhood in general, or someone else? Over the next week, the duplex remained eerily quiet. I'd sometimes hear movement on Bernice's side, muted footsteps, running water, a door opening or shutting, but I never saw her again, despite my attempts to run into her outside. Each time I passed by her car in the driveway, it sat idle, collecting leaves. It was almost as though she was avoiding me. Then, late one evening, I heard an odd scraping sound on my porch. Heart pounding, I peered through the peephole. A figure crouched near my front step, fiddling with something. My first instinct was to call out, but fear kept my voice locked in my throat. After a few tense seconds, the figure stood up, turned around, and walked away. I couldn't make out their face in the darkness. I hurried outside, shining my phone's flashlight. On the step was a single envelope, no name, no return address. Inside, I found a note written in neat, angular handwriting. "They're watching you. Don't let them in." My pulse thundered as I reread the message. Who was watching me, and why? I checked to see if Bernice's lights were on, hoping to ask her about it, but her side was completely dark. I locked my door and triple-checked the windows before finally managing to drift into a fitful sleep. In the days that followed, strange things piled up. I'd come home from work to find my mailbox ajar and empty, even though I expected letters. My trash bin was sometimes tipped over, trash strewn around the driveway. One evening, I noticed the side gate, which led to the shared backyard, was propped open when I was certain I'd closed it. I grew more and more uneasy. Several times I knocked on Bernice's door, hoping she might clarify her cryptic warning about being careful. But there was never an answer. Sometimes I thought I caught a glimpse of her silhouette through the curtains, but as soon as I knocked, the lights would switch off. Finally, one Saturday afternoon, I stepped onto the porch to see if my mail had arrived and nearly stumbled upon Bernice. She was standing there, face pale, eyes darting nervously around the neighborhood. She thrust something into my hand. Another note, sealed in a plastic bag. "Read it later," she whispered, voice trembling. "And don't let them see you with it." Before I could ask who they were, she slipped away, glancing over her shoulder as though someone might be following her. My heart pounded. I rushed back inside and tore open the bag. The note read, "They've been in your house at night. Change your locks, and don't confront them alone." My stomach flipped. Had someone actually broken in while I slept? The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that things felt slightly off in my home each morning. A kitchen drawer left open, a cupboard door cracked, a lamp turned just a fraction of an inch. I'd written it off as my own carelessness, but now I wasn't so sure. I spent the next couple of hours installing brand new deadbolts and window latches. While I worked, I caught sight of a black SUV idling across the street. Its tinted windows gave away nothing. But as soon as I looked directly at it, the SUV pulled away, leaving me with a sense of being watched. That night, I turned off all the lights and sat in the living room, sipping tea in the dark. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside, soft, deliberate. My pulse skyrocketed. Suddenly, the knob on my front door jiggled. If I hadn't changed the lock, whoever was out there might have slipped right inside. I clenched my phone, ready to call the police, but the jiggling stopped after a few seconds. Footsteps receded into the night. I called Bernice the next day. Her number was on the welcome note that accompanied the cookies, but it went straight to voicemail. When I tried again, it rang once, then disconnected. Growing more anxious by the hour, I decided to file a police report. The officer I spoke to seemed polite but unconvinced. Without evidence, there wasn't much they could do. They agreed to drive by occasionally at night. That evening, as I was about to leave for a late shift at work, Bernice finally emerged from her side, her hair disheveled, eyes ringed with dark circles. She hurried over, whispering with frantic urgency. "I saw them last night. 2 men. They were trying to pick your lock." "I heard them," I said, my voice unsteady. "Who are they? Why are they targeting me?" She shook her head, tears brimming. "I don't know everything, but they did the same thing to the previous tenant. He vanished in the middle of the night. The landlord said he left without notice, but I don't believe it." A chill shot through me. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, anger and fear mingling. Her lip quivered. "I was scared. If they caught me warning you..." She exhaled shakily. "You should leave, but be careful. They watch me too. It's not safe." Before I could press her for more details, she hurried back inside, snapping her deadbolt shut. I stood there reeling. She seemed genuinely terrified, and now so was I. That night at work, I found myself jumping at every phone ring, every passing shadow. By the time I got home, it was past midnight. The driveway was dark, the street eerily silent. My headlights swept across Bernice's window, and I glimpsed her standing behind the curtains, staring out. Our eyes met for a split second. Then she was gone. Inside my half of the duplex, the air felt oppressively still. I flipped on the lights, checking every room, every closet. Nothing seemed amiss at first, but as I entered the kitchen, I noticed something glinting on the countertop. It was a small, handheld device, some sort of electronic gadget. A blinking red light at the top pulsed like a heartbeat. My skin prickled. Had they left this here? Was it a bug, a camera, or some kind of tracker? I grabbed a dish towel, intending to wrap it up, but the device suddenly emitted a piercing beep. Panicking, I dropped it, and it shattered on the floor. Almost immediately, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have done that." My blood ran cold. They knew I'd found it. They were probably watching me right now. I rushed to the window, scanning the dark street. A single street lamp flickered, illuminating a parked car far down the block, but I couldn't see if anyone was inside. I tried calling the police again, but the dispatcher's tone told me they thought I was overreacting. The best they could do, they said, was send a patrol car around. No promises on timing. My frustration and fear mounted. That's when the power went out, plunging my side of the duplex into darkness. Lightning fear shot through my veins. Why the sudden blackout? I dashed to the fuse box, fumbling in the dark. My flashlight trembled as I flicked each breaker switch, but nothing restored the power. Meanwhile, I heard faint noises outside. Footsteps on gravel, a low murmur of voices. Then a single beam of light swept across my living room window, from outside. I froze, peeking through a corner of the curtain. 2 silhouettes in dark clothing, each holding flashlights. They stepped onto my porch, turned the knob. Locked. After a moment of hushed discussion, one of them crouched down, presumably working on the lock with a tool. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. I frantically dialed 911, whispering into the phone. The dispatcher told me to remain calm. Officers were en route. Time dragged as I crouched behind the sofa, trying to stay silent. I couldn't even risk stepping on the floor too heavily, afraid the creaking boards would betray me. Suddenly, the front door rattled violently. The lock was holding, but for how long? They were prying, banging, cursing under their breath. My entire body shook. I pictured them bursting in, 2 faceless shapes in the dark. Did they want to rob me? Harm me? To my disbelief, after a few more tries, the rattling ceased. There was a tense pause, and then I heard them retreat. I counted to 30 before daring to breathe. When I peeked outside, I saw them disappearing around the corner toward Bernice's side of the duplex. Oh no. Without thinking, I ran to my back door, unlocked it, and slipped outside. Rain drizzled in the chilly night air. I crept around the property, hugging the side of the house. Through Bernice's window, I spotted faint movement, shadows crossing her living room. My stomach knotted. Had they gotten in? I considered banging on her door to warn her, but terror rooted me in place. Then, from the darkness, headlights flashed as a patrol car cruised slowly up the street. The men must have seen it too, because I heard a commotion, hushed voices, the sound of breaking glass. Within seconds, two dark shapes sprinted across Bernice's yard, vanishing into the night. I waved the patrol car down, my words tumbling out in a panicked rush. The officers gave chase, but the men were long gone. I pleaded with them to check on Bernice. We found her door locked and bolted. No answer. After a few minutes of pounding, we broke in, fearing the worst. But Bernice wasn't there. Her furnishings were mostly gone, as if she'd moved out in a hurry. The officers and I exchanged bewildered glances. There was no sign of struggle, just emptiness. The next day, Bernice's car was towed away. The landlord claimed she'd terminated her lease abruptly, leaving no forwarding address. I tried calling her number, but it was disconnected. It was as if she'd never existed. Within a week, I'd packed my own belongings, unwilling to remain in a place where shadowy figures could break in at will. The landlord, of course, insisted he had no idea what I was talking about. According to him, no previous tenant had ever vanished. When I pressed him, he just gave me a look that made my skin crawl. I've since moved to a different town, somewhere with better lighting and neighbors who are more transparent. Yet I still feel uneasy at night, peeking out windows and double-checking locks. Sometimes I dream of Bernice, handing me that plate of cookies, whispering, "Be careful about who you trust around here." In those dreams, she's standing in an empty room with no way out, her eyes desperate. I always wake up in a cold sweat. I never learned who those men were or why they targeted me. Part of me wonders if Bernice was part of it all, if the warning was just a twisted way to reel me into some bigger game. Or perhaps she was just another victim, forced to flee under threats. In the end, I only know two things for sure. Something dark was happening in that duplex, and I narrowly escaped it. He kept knocking, insisting it was my package, but when I checked the peephole, he wasn't holding anything. I was already on edge that night, having binge-watched too many true crime documentaries. The power of suggestion is strong. Every bump and thump can feel like a potential threat. Around 10 p.m., just as I was about to turn off the lights, I heard a brisk knock at my front door. Naturally, my first thought was, who knocks this late? My second thought was, maybe a neighbor needs something. I made my way to the door, but I hesitated before flipping the porch light on. Through the small peephole, I saw a man dressed in a dark jacket and a baseball cap, standing too close to the door to make out his features clearly. He knocked again, louder this time. "Package delivery," he called out. "I've got a parcel for you." I frowned. I wasn't expecting any deliveries, especially not at 10 p.m. That was a red flag right away. Still, I didn't want to ignore a potential emergency, or maybe a messed up overnight delivery. "Who's it for?" I asked, keeping my voice firm. "Are you?" He said my name, perfectly pronounced. That made my heart skip a beat. "Please, I need a signature." He kept knocking, insisting it was my package, but when I checked the peephole, he wasn't holding anything. I pressed my eye to the peephole again. Sure enough, his hands were empty. No package, no clipboard, just empty hands hanging by his sides. Alarm bells blared in my mind. If he really had a delivery, why wasn't he holding it? "I'm not expecting anything," I shouted. "Come back tomorrow or leave it at the door." The man leaned closer, almost pressing his face against the peephole. He repeated my name, this time in a slow, deliberate way that made my skin crawl. "It's urgent," he said. "Open up." An icy dread settled over me. I flicked off the porch light, hoping he'd think I'd left. Instead, he started rattling the doorknob, testing if it was locked. Thank goodness I'd thrown the deadbolt. My heart thundered. I grabbed my phone and dialed the non-emergency police line, explaining the situation in hushed tones. While waiting on hold, I heard the knob jiggle more violently, then stop. The man exhaled loudly, as if frustrated. Footsteps moved away from the door, then silence. My pulse pounded in my ears as I strained to hear any sign of him leaving. The operator finally picked up. I gave them my address, and they said they'd send a patrol car around. I stayed on the line, peeking out a window that overlooked my driveway. The man was nowhere in sight. Relief washed over me. Maybe he had left. I thanked the operator and hung up. But before I could exhale properly, another loud knock jolted me. This time it came from my back door. Fear exploded in my chest. How had he gotten around to the back without me noticing? I crept through the dark house, phone clutched tight. The back door had a small window with curtains drawn, so I carefully lifted a corner. In the faint glow of my kitchen light, I saw the outline of his cap. He pressed his face to the glass, peering in, one hand shielding the reflection. I ducked down instantly. "I can see you," he called, voice muffled by the door. "I know you're there." Tears sprang to my eyes, equal parts terror and anger. "Leave me alone," I shouted. "I've called the police." A pause, then he laughed, low and unsettling. "Don't bother with that," he said. "They won't get here in time." I crawled away, heart thundering. This wasn't a random stranger who got the wrong address. He knew my name. He seemed to know my layout too, going from front door to back door quickly, staying out of sight. Who is he, and why me? Seconds later, I heard glass shatter. My stomach lurched. I peered around the corner into the kitchen. A jagged hole in the window, the man's hand snaking through to unlock the door. I stifled a scream, searching for something, anything, to protect myself. My eyes landed on a cast iron skillet on the stove. With adrenaline surging, I grabbed it. Just as the lock clicked, I mustered my courage, sprinted forward, and slammed the skillet down on his arm. He yelped in pain, yanking his hand back through the broken glass. Furious, he kicked the door, but the deadbolt held. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. Another frantic attempt at the lock, another kick. The entire frame rattled. I dialed 911 this time, practically screaming into the phone that someone was breaking in. The dispatcher urged me to find a safe place to hide until officers arrived. I holed up in a small closet under the stairs, pushing boxes and old coats aside. My phone's battery was low. I prayed it wouldn't die on me. The dispatcher stayed on the line, but I could hear the fear in her voice too. This was serious. Meanwhile, the man continued pounding on doors and windows around the house, moving from one to another like a predator circling prey. Crashes rang out. Perhaps he was throwing something at the glass. I squeezed my eyes shut. Where is the patrol car? I wondered desperately. At last, red and blue lights danced through the cracks in my front curtains. Sirens blared. The pounding stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I held my breath, listening to muffled shouting outside. Then a commanding voice. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" I crawled out of the closet, my entire body trembling, and crept to the window. The officers had their flashlights trained on a man in a baseball cap, kneeling on my front lawn with his hands behind his head. Relief swept over me so profound that I almost collapsed. They escorted me outside to identify him. My legs felt like rubber as I approached. He kept his head bowed, but I caught a glimpse of his face. Sharp features, a slight scar on his jaw. I didn't recognize him. The officer said he claimed he was just a courier with a late-night package, but they found no package, no ID, not even a wallet. I pressed charges for attempted burglary, and he was taken away. The police left an incident report number. Shaken but grateful, I spent the rest of the night in a hotel, unable to face the dark rooms of my house alone. The next morning, I returned to find the back door window boarded up by a neighbor I barely knew, an elderly man who'd heard the commotion. As I stepped inside, an unsettling thought gnawed at me. How did this stranger know my full name? The police had no answer, and the man refused to talk. He was booked on trespassing and attempted break-in, but the investigation didn't turn up much. No record of him working for any delivery service. In the weeks that followed, I installed a security system, cameras around my property, extra motion lights, everything I could think of. For a while, I slept easier, telling myself he was locked up, that he'd never bother me again. But I got a chilling call one day from the detective assigned to the case. The man had made bail. No one knew where he was. Anxiety clamped down on my life. I left lights on in every room, checked the cameras obsessively, and jumped at every unexpected sound. Friends offered to let me crash on their couches, but I refused, determined not to let fear drive me from my home. Still, the nights felt endless. Each small noise magnified 100-fold in my imagination. A month after his release, a package arrived at my door, this time left quietly during the day. It had no return address, just my name scrawled in messy handwriting. My heart pounded as I opened it, half expecting something terrible. Inside was a simple paperback novel. Its title, The Delivery. Inside the front cover, written in pen, "You should have opened up." My hand shook so badly I dropped the book. It felt like a message, a warning that he knew where I lived and could come back anytime he chose. The police took the package as evidence, but said it was nearly impossible to prove who had sent it. So here I am, living with the uneasy reality that the man who tried to force his way into my home, claiming he had a package, could return at any moment. Every ring at the door, every knock sends my pulse skyrocketing. I wish I could go back in time and never open the door that night, but I keep telling myself I did everything right. I locked my doors, called the police, fought back. Sometimes in my dreams, I see him standing there in his dark jacket and cap, knocking and knocking, an endless echo in the dead of night. In the dream, I look out through the peephole to find him smiling, holding nothing at all and whispering, "I have a delivery for you." He greeted me by name, but I never told him who I was. I've always been a bit of a night owl, and I love hiking in the woods after dark. Most people find it creepy, but there's something about the forest at midnight, quiet, shadowy, filled with hidden life, that speaks to me. It feels like another world, untouched by the hustle of daylight. On this particular night, I arrived at the trailhead around 11 p.m. The moon was half full, lending just enough light to silhouette the towering pines. Armed with a headlamp, water bottle, and a small survival kit, I started down the familiar path. The first mile or so was peaceful. My boots crunched softly on gravel, and the chirp of crickets provided a reassuring soundtrack. Somewhere around the second mile, I caught a glimpse of light up ahead. Another hiker, judging by the bobbing beam. It's rare to see anyone else at this hour, so I was curious. I picked up my pace, but my foot slipped on a patch of wet leaves. I landed hard on my knee, wincing in pain. That's when I heard a voice from the darkness. "You okay there?" I looked up to see a man approaching, his headlamp illuminating concern in his eyes. He was tall, wearing a faded green jacket and cargo pants, a backpack strapped tightly to his shoulders. I forced a smile, feeling embarrassed. "Yeah, just lost my footing." He reached out a hand to help me up. "I've been there. These trails get slippery at night." "Thanks," I said, dusting off my palms. "It's pretty quiet out here. Didn't expect to see anyone." He grinned. "Same here. I usually hike alone." We walked together for a short while, chatting about the darkness, the best night hiking spots. He seemed friendly enough, relaxed posture, easy smile. Eventually, we reached a fork in the trail. I paused to check my map, and that's when he said something that made my blood run cold. He greeted me by name, but I never told him who I was. He said it so casually. "You know, it's a great night for a hike, Alex." I froze. "Wait, what did you call me?" "Alex," he repeated, as if it was perfectly natural. "That's your name, right?" My heart hammered. I knew for certain I hadn't introduced myself. How do you know that?" He shrugged, shining his headlamp onto a signpost. "Saw your name on your gear," he said, pointing to my backpack. But my backpack didn't have any name tags or identifiable marks. It was plain black, brand new. I stared at him, and he smiled, unblinking. Nerves frayed, I forced a laugh. "Right, must be the gear." I flicked off my headlamp briefly, using the darkness as a shield to collect myself. Something felt off about this man. I decided I'd take the left path, which led back toward the parking area, but in a roundabout way. He said he was going right. We parted ways. The night air felt suddenly colder. As I continued alone, my senses sharpened with paranoia. Every rustle of leaves seemed amplified. After half a mile, I stopped to sip water, heart still pounding. That's when I spotted another beam of light moving parallel to my trail, about 50 yards into the dense woods. It was him. No mistaking the green jacket, the same gait. He wasn't going right at all. He was following me, but at a distance. My mind raced. Why lie? I turned off my headlamp and crouched behind a fallen tree, watching his light drift in and out of view. He seemed to be heading toward a small ravine, that led to an unmarked side trail. If I kept going, we'd intersect again near the clearing by the creek. Swallowing my fear, I decided to head back to the main path that looped around to the parking lot, but my sense of direction faltered. In my anxious state, I'd taken a wrong turn. The trees looked unfamiliar, the undergrowth denser. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Typical for these woods. My map was no help without landmarks. Panic flared. Then I heard footsteps, closer this time. A branch snapped. I ducked behind a large pine, flipping off my light again. The footsteps stopped abruptly. In the near-total darkness, I strained to hear breathing or movement. Nothing. Slowly, I peered around the trunk. His headlamp flickered through the foliage. He was standing not 15 feet away, scanning the trees as though searching for something. Someone. I bit my lip to keep from gasping. The beam passed overhead, mercifully missing me. After an agonizing minute, he moved on. I waited until the glow of his lamp faded, then crept in the opposite direction. The forest now felt like a labyrinth of shadows. My only goal was to get out. The sense of being hunted pushed adrenaline through my veins. My knee throbbed from the earlier fall, but I forced myself to keep moving. Time blurred. I don't know how long I wandered, but eventually I heard the distant rush of water. The creek. I was close to the clearing. From there, I could follow the water downstream to a footbridge that led back to the main trail. Relief flickered in me, but fear still gnawed. Was he ahead, waiting? I pressed on, stepping carefully to avoid snapping twigs. As the creek's gentle roar grew louder, I saw the clearing, bathed in faint moonlight. The water shimmered, reflecting silver waves across the rock-strewn banks. And there he was, on the other side, standing perfectly still among the pines. My heart nearly stopped. He'd beaten me here. How had he moved so fast? He lifted his headlamp, shining it directly at me. Blinded, I stumbled backward. Then I heard his voice, carrying across the gurgling creek. "Alex, you're lost. Let me help." A cold sweat broke out along my spine. He knows my name. He's been tracking me, and now he's offering help? Without responding, I turned and bolted, tearing through the undergrowth. Branches whipped my face. Behind me, I heard him crashing through the brush, giving chase. The moonlight offered scant illumination, but enough to keep me from slamming into a tree. My breath came in ragged gasps. I could hear him cursing, calling out, "Alex!" as if we were friends separated in the dark. I ran until my lungs burned, eventually ducking behind a large boulder. For several minutes, the only sound was my pulse thrumming in my ears. Then, faintly, I heard his footsteps again, slower this time. He was searching methodically, combing the area. Terror pulsed in every fiber of my being. If he found me here alone, what would he do? My mind raced back to the trailhead. It was at least 2 miles away. Another mile from there to the nearest ranger station. The odds of outrunning him seemed slim, but I had no other choice. Summoning courage, I sprang for my hiding spot and sprinted through the trees, not even trying to be quiet. This was about speed now, about making it to safety. He must have heard me immediately because I caught a glimpse of his light whipping around, illuminating the forest floor. My knee screamed in protest, but adrenaline numbed it enough to keep going. Branches clawed at my arms, leaves slapped my face. With every step, I expected a hand to clamp down on my shoulder, dragging me into the darkness. Finally, the parking lot's gravel appeared before me, glowing faintly under a solitary lamppost. My car was the only vehicle there. I fumbled in my pocket, yanking out my keys. Behind me, the crunch of footsteps on gravel. Closer and closer. I made it to my car, unlocked the door, and threw myself inside. Slamming the locks, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He stood just at the edge of the lot, headlamp off now, his face a blur in the dim light. I could feel his eyes on me. I started the engine, tires squealing as I lurched onto the road. My breath came in ragged sobs, adrenaline still spiking. When I looked back, he was gone, vanished into the night. It wasn't until I got home, locked my doors, and sat in the shower with scalding water pouring over me, that the reality sank in. Someone out there knew my name, tracked me through the woods, and nearly cornered me miles from any help. I reported the incident to the park rangers the following morning. They listened, concerned, but said they had no leads. Several hikers had reported suspicious encounters in the area over the past year, but no one had been harmed, yet. Without a crime, they couldn't do much beyond increasing patrols. Weeks passed, and I avoided night hikes altogether. My knee healed, but my sense of safety never did. Every time I considered going back, I pictured that man greeting me by name in the darkness. Sometimes I dream of him standing on the trail, shining his headlamp straight into my eyes. In the dream, he says nothing at all, but somehow, he still calls my name. I still hike, but only during the day and in well-traveled areas. The night no longer feels like a peaceful sanctuary. When darkness falls, I sometimes imagine him out there, pacing the trails he knows so well, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul. If he ever greets them by name, they might not be as lucky as I was. It wasn't until my reflection smiled at me first that I realized something was wrong. When I moved into my new apartment, I immediately loved the layout. The living room was spacious, the bedroom cozy, and a narrow hallway connected them. Halfway down that hallway hung an old, ornate mirror left by the previous tenant. I'm not much for antique decor, but I found its intricate gold frame charming. Plus, it made the otherwise cramped hallway feel a bit larger. On my first night, I walked past the mirror to fetch a glass of water. In my peripheral vision, I noticed a subtle flicker, like a shadow crossing its surface. I paused, stepping back to examine it. The reflection showed me the hallway and the closed door behind me. Nothing out of the ordinary. Probably just my tired eyes playing tricks. Over the next few days, though, I felt strangely drawn to that mirror. Each time I passed, I'd catch a glimpse of something in it, like a ripple or a flash of movement. Yet whenever I looked directly, it reflected back the same scene. Me, the hallway, everything as it should be. By the end of the week, I started to realize the reflection sometimes lagged a split second behind my actual movements. For instance, if I waved my hand, I'd see the reflection wave just a tiny bit late. It was barely noticeable, but once I spotted it, I couldn't unsee it. My mind tried to rationalize. Maybe it was an optical illusion, a trick of the lighting. Late one evening, unable to sleep, I wandered into the hallway to stand before the mirror. My reflection stared back, mirroring my every move, almost. A tension gnawed at the pit of my stomach, like I was being studied. As I turned to go back to my room, something made me glance at the mirror again. That's when it happened. It wasn't until my reflection smiled at me first that I realized something was wrong. My own face in the glass twisted into a grin, just a fraction of a second before my real face did. It was as if the image had a will of its own, anticipating my expression. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. When I looked again, the reflection was normal, only smiling because I was, albeit with that eerie hint of delay. I hurried back to bed, struggling to convince myself it was just my imagination. But as the nights passed, the oddities increased. Sometimes I heard faint whispering from the hallway, only to find it empty. Other times I saw movement in the mirror when I was completely still. My reflection's hands would shift, or my head would tilt slightly, as if checking if I was watching. Uneasy, I decided to remove the mirror. But when I tried to lift it off the wall, I found it inexplicably heavy. Despite straining with all my might, it wouldn't budge from its hook. Frustrated, I called a friend over to help. To my embarrassment, when she arrived, we managed to lift the mirror easily. She carried it right into the living room without struggle. I mumbled an apology, feeling foolish. Maybe I'd just been too tired or spooked the first time. Once we set it against the living room wall, I felt a wave of relief. The hallway felt less oppressive without the mirror's stare. That night, however, I woke up around 2 a.m. to a strange scraping sound. I flipped on the light, heart racing. The mirror was back in the hallway, hanging exactly where it had been before. I nearly dropped the flashlight. How was that possible? My friend and I had left it in the living room. It wasn't like she'd snuck in to play a trick on me. She had no key, and I was alone. Determined, I pulled the mirror down again, dragging it across the floor into a locked storage closet. But come morning, it was back on the hallway wall, looking exactly as it always had, not a scratch on its frame. My rational mind warred with the impossible. I started to avoid looking into it altogether, darting past with my gaze fixed on the floor. Still, I sensed its presence, like an unblinking eye. Then one night, I heard a voice call my name. It was soft, almost melodic, coming from somewhere behind me. My blood ran cold as I realized it was coming from the hallway. I stepped out of the bedroom, flicked on the light. The mirror's surface seemed darker, as though reflecting a dimly lit corridor rather than my own well-lit hallway. With trembling steps, I approached. My reflection stood there, but the hallway in the reflection wasn't my hallway anymore. It looked older, with peeling wallpaper and shadows that writhed like living things. My reflection slowly raised a hand to the glass, palm pressed flat against it, as though trying to break through. I could see my own real hand trembling at my side, not raised at all. "I need to move out," I muttered aloud. But some macabre fascination kept me pinned in place. The reflection beckoned me closer. Against all better judgment, I leaned in, heart hammering. That's when I saw movement behind my reflected self, a tall, spindly figure emerging from the darkness. It placed a long-fingered hand on my reflection's shoulder, smiling with a mouth too wide, teeth too long. My reflection didn't flinch. It just continued staring at me with hollow eyes. Then in one fluid motion, the figure reached forward, placing its palm against the inside of the glass. A faint crack spiderwebbed from the point of contact. I stumbled back, adrenaline spiking. In the real hallway, the mirror remained uncracked. But inside the reflection, the fissures spread, distorting my reflected face. The last thing I saw before I fled was that twisted grin forming again on my reflection's lips. I spent the night in my car, engine running, lights on. I called my landlord in the morning, demanding an explanation about the apartment's history, about the mirror. He seemed genuinely puzzled, swearing he knew nothing. He told me I was free to remove or dispose of it. I hung up, determined to smash the thing to pieces. Armed with a hammer, I marched back into the hallway. My entire body shook with fear. But when I brought the hammer down, expecting shattering glass, the mirror surface rippled like water. The hammer rebounded, nearly wrenching itself from my grip. No scratch, no crack. It was as if the mirror wasn't made of glass at all. In a panic, I called a local junk removal company, pleading with them to cart the mirror away. 2 men arrived with a dolly and blankets. I watched anxiously as they removed it from the wall, loaded it up, and wheeled it out. I followed them to their truck, heart pounding. The mirror glinted under the daylight, showing nothing unusual in its reflection. After they left, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Finally, it's gone. But that sense of relief was short-lived. When I returned to the hallway, I found deep gouges in the wall where the mirror once hung, scratches like claw marks, radiating outward. I nearly lost my nerve right then. Still, I reassured myself. It's gone at least. I could patch up the wall, move on. For a few days, life felt normal. Then, late one afternoon, I received a call from the junk removal company. The manager asked me to come to their warehouse, sounding uneasy. When I arrived, I found the 2 workers who'd taken the mirror looking visibly shaken. They led me to a corner of the warehouse. There, propped against a crate, was the mirror. "How did it get back here?" I whispered, dread creeping up my spine. They both swore they had dropped it off at a disposal facility hours away. Yet somehow, it had reappeared in their warehouse overnight, exactly in the same spot they stored it before transport. The manager told me he wanted it gone, wanted me to take it away. The workers refused to touch it again. After a tense argument, I gave up and left empty-handed. That evening, I found the mirror in my hallway once more. I can't explain how it's bound to this place, or to me. I've tried selling the apartment, but buyers back out when they sense my desperation to leave. I've had a priest bless the hallway. A friend suggests sagging the place. Nothing works. The mirror remains. Now I keep it draped with a sheet. Still, I can hear soft rustling beneath the cloth at night. Sometimes, a faint, mocking laugh. Other nights, I'll find the sheet pulled aside, the glass gleaming in the dark, showing impossible scenes, a hallway that isn't mine, or my reflection standing in some unknown place. I've learned to live in constant fear, never meeting my own gaze in that cursed mirror. Because the day it fully captures me, my soul perhaps, might be the day I disappear into that other hallway, replaced by the reflection that smiles before I do. When he said, "You don't remember me, do you?" my blood ran cold. I was only at the supermarket for a quick errand, picking up milk, eggs, maybe a loaf of bread. It was one of those evenings where I had worked late and was running on autopilot, mindlessly navigating the aisles under fluorescent lights. Clutching my little plastic basket, I stopped in front of the dairy section to grab a carton of milk. When I turned around, I nearly collided with a man standing right behind me. He was tall, probably in his late 30s, and wore a faded black jacket and jeans. His eyes had a strange intensity, like he was deeply focused on something. At first I thought maybe he just needed something from the shelf behind me. I stepped aside, murmuring a quick apology, but he didn't move. He just stared at me with a faint smile on his lips. Can I help you?" I asked, my voice echoing oddly in the near-empty aisle. He kept his gaze locked on mine, then said quietly, "You don't remember me, do you?" When he said, "You don't remember me, do you?" my blood ran cold. My heart gave a jolt. Did I know him? I scrambled to place his face. High school classmate? Former co-worker? Nothing came to mind. Something in his posture and tone sent a ripple of unease through me. "No," I managed, forcing a polite smile. "I'm sorry, I don't." He said nothing else, just gave that same small smile before turning and walking away. I felt like I'd just emerged from a brief but disorienting dream. Shaking off the weird encounter, I finished my shopping and hurried to the checkout. As I was loading groceries into my car, I glanced around the parking lot, half expecting to see him, but he was nowhere in sight. By the time I drove home, I'd nearly convinced myself the whole thing was a random misunderstanding. But that night, as I lay in bed scrolling through social media, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a new follow request on a platform I rarely used, from an account with no profile picture and no posts, just a single username. Remember me. My stomach did a little flip. Normally, I'd ignore such a request, but curiosity won out. I checked the profile, saw nothing, and decided not to accept. Then a direct message appeared. "You really don't remember me, do you?" My pulse spiked. It was too coincidental. The man from the supermarket must have tracked me down somehow. Maybe he recognized me from somewhere, or overheard my name at the checkout. I felt unsettled. Rather than engage, I blocked the account and tried to sleep. The next morning, I went about my routine, telling myself everything was fine. But on the way home from work, I noticed a car behind me, a dark sedan. At first, I thought nothing of it. Plenty of cars used that main road. But it stayed with me for several turns, all the way into my neighborhood. When I pulled into my driveway, the sedan drove past my house at a crawl. I caught a glimpse of the driver. It was him. My throat went dry. How does he know where I live? I locked my door the moment I got inside, double-checking the windows. Trying to calm myself, I reasoned it could be a coincidence, but deep down I knew better. That night I tried searching my memories. Did I meet this guy at a party or a family event years ago? Maybe we went to the same elementary school? Nothing fit. Around midnight, I was startled by my phone vibrating on the coffee table. A text from an unknown number. "We need to talk." Anger started to replace my fear. "Who are you?" I replied. The response was immediate. "Someone you knew once." I didn't reply. Instead, I blocked that number too. Minutes later, another text arrived from a different number. "You can block me all you want. It doesn't change the past." Trembling, I turned my phone off, deciding it was better not to engage. But I barely slept, kept awake by the idea that a stranger was lurking outside, holding on to some imaginary grudge or lost connection. The next day at work, a coworker noticed my anxiety and asked if I was okay. I confided in her, explaining the bizarre encounter and the messages. She suggested contacting the police. I hesitated. What would I even say? That a guy recognized me at the grocery store, and now he was sending cryptic messages. Without direct threats, the police might not take it seriously. Still, I felt safer letting someone else know what was happening. On the way home, I kept checking my rearview mirror. No dark sedan. Relief flooded me. Maybe he'd given up. Still, I couldn't shake the sense of being watched. I sped up, wanting to get home as quickly as possible. That evening, I decided to tidy my house. Anything to keep my mind off the situation. While picking up old receipts from the dining table, I found a small slip of paper I didn't recall leaving there. It read, "I remember our promise." No signature, no clue how it got into my house. Horror clawed at my gut. He'd been inside. I called the police then, nearly hysterical. 2 officers arrived, combed through the house, found no signs of forced entry. My locks were intact, windows unopened. Yet the note was real, and so was my fear. They took a report, suggested installing an alarm system, but that was all they could do. Unable to stay in the house alone, I crashed on a friend's couch for a few nights. She had a spare key to feed my cat while I was at work, so at least the cat wouldn't starve. Each evening, though, my friend and I would return together to do a quick check. Everything stayed normal until the 3rd night, when we found a folded piece of paper taped to my fridge door. Written inside was an address and a time: Shelby Park, 8 p.m., Friday. I felt dizzy with dread. My friend urged me to stay away, but I sensed he wasn't going to stop until I confronted him. Maybe if I went, I could finally figure out what he wanted and end this nightmare. Against my better judgment, I decided I'd go, at least to gather information with my phone in hand, ready to call the cops if needed. Friday night came too quickly. My friend insisted on waiting in the car while I met him. The address led to a small clearing near the park's entrance, lit by a single lamppost. I stood there, heart pounding, scanning the shadows. Eventually, I saw movement, a figure stepping out from behind a cluster of trees. It was him. Same faded jacket, same intense stare. He approached slowly, as though not wanting to scare me off. My fists tightened at my sides. "Who are you?" I demanded, voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" He gazed at me with an unsettling mix of sadness and anger. "We were friends once," he said. "Best friends, actually. You promised you'd never forget me." Confusion swept over me. "That's not possible," I murmured. "I don't have any best friend I've forgotten." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a dog-eared photograph. He held it up to me. In the faint light, I could make out 2 children standing side by side, a girl who looked like me, maybe 6 or 7 years old, and a boy with sandy hair. They were grinning, arms around each other's shoulders. The back read, "Together forever, don't forget, Mia and Evan." My heart stuttered. Mia was my childhood nickname, used only by family. But who was Evan? I blinked, memory fuzzy. The photo definitely resembled me, though the boy's face was a stranger's. "Where? Did you get that?" His face contorted. "My name's Evan," he said quietly. "I lived on your street when we were kids. We were inseparable, but you moved away. You swore you'd call, but you never did. You forgot me." A wave of guilt and confusion rushed over me, though I still had no memory of him. "That was decades ago," I whispered, trying to make sense of it. "I don't remember. I'm sorry." His eyes hardened. "You made me a promise. I waited years for you to keep it. I tried finding you, but your family moved around. I felt abandoned." He took a shaky breath. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just needed you to remember." Tears of shock welled in my eyes. The fear I'd felt started blending with sympathy. "Evan, I didn't mean to break any promise. I was a child. I barely remember that time." He lowered his gaze, the photograph trembling in his hand. "I know, it's stupid. But I built my whole life around this idea that I'd find you. And when I finally did, you just looked at me like a stranger. I didn't know what to say. Part of me still felt on guard. Someone who tracked me down so obsessively, broke into my home, left me terrified. Another part felt terrible at the pain he clearly carried. After a long silence, he tucked the photo back into his pocket. "I won't bother you again," he said softly. "I just needed to see your face to know you're real." He turned to walk away. A swirl of conflicting emotions roiled in my chest. Maybe I should have let him go, but something made me speak up. "Evan, wait." He paused. I swallowed, recalling the terror, the cryptic notes, the boundary-crossing behavior. But I also saw the hurt in his eyes. "You scared me," I managed, voice shaking. "What you did wasn't okay. But I'm sorry for forgetting." He nodded slowly, as if acknowledging both the apology and the accusation. Then he continued into the darkness without another word. My friend rushed over, asking if I was all right, if we should call the cops. I said no. Something in me needed closure. Over the next few weeks, I waited for more messages, more ominous notes. None came. The black sedan never reappeared. Part of me expected to see him lurking around every corner, but he seemed to have vanished from my life as abruptly as he'd entered it. I still don't remember much of my early childhood, just flashes of playgrounds, crayons, and a friend whose name might have been Evan. I can't reconcile that sweet, innocent boy with the man who terrified me in a grocery store aisle. Sometimes I wonder if I should have offered him help, tried to make amends, but I can't deny the relief I felt when he disappeared. To this day, I lock my doors and check my windows carefully. I can't forget the adrenaline that coursed through me when he said, "You don't remember me, do you?" Sometimes I catch a glimpse of a tall stranger in a crowd and my heart lurches, expecting it to be him. I'll never know if he found the closure he sought. For my part, I only know that some promises made in childhood can echo forward in haunting ways, especially when you can't remember making them. He smiled in the rearview mirror and said, "You're not my first passenger tonight." It was just another late shift at the office, and by the time I finally wrapped up my work, it was after midnight. The buses had stopped running, and I didn't feel like waiting for a taxi in the cold, so I called a rideshare, as I'd done dozens of times before. Nothing special, just a quick trip home. The app showed my driver's name as Kevin, with a decent rating. The car that pulled up was a silver sedan, license plate matching what the app displayed. I slid into the back seat, yawning and ready to zone out. "Long day?" the driver asked, pulling away from the curb. "You have no idea," I replied, a polite smile on my face. He was middle-aged, hair thinning, wearing a clean button-up shirt. Nothing about him struck me as odd. We exchanged the usual small talk at first. How was my night? How busy the city was? Then he fell silent, focusing on the road. I was thankful. I just wanted to rest. Rain pattered on the windows, the streetlights casting fleeting shadows across the interior. We drove on for what felt like 10 minutes. Suddenly, I realized we weren't heading in the right direction. The cityscape outside looked unfamiliar. Empty streets, fewer lights. My phone showed the route had changed. Kevin?" I piped up, leaning forward. "I think maybe you missed a turn?" He smiled in the rearview mirror, but it wasn't a friendly smile, more like a quiet smirk. "Don't worry," he said smoothly, "just avoiding some roadwork." My nerves flickered. "Okay," I replied, though I hadn't seen any notifications about road closures. I kept an eye on my phone's GPS, which showed we were headed farther away from my neighborhood. Minutes later, he turned onto a dark, narrow road with no streetlights at all. My stomach twisted in a knot. This definitely wasn't right. "Hey, this isn't the way," I said, my voice growing sharper. "Please take me home." He just gave that unsettling smile again. "Don't fret. You're not my first passenger tonight." He smiled in the rearview mirror and said, "You're not my first passenger tonight." Something about the way he said it, the low, almost mocking tone, made my blood run cold. My hand shook as I checked the child lock on my door. It was engaged. Panic seized me. I tried the window controls, but they were locked from the driver's side. I dialed 911 on my phone, but before I could press call, the driver suddenly jerked the car to a stop. We'd pulled onto a gravel side road, the headlights illuminating a patch of muddy ground flanked by thick trees. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Let me out!" He reached back lightning fast, snatching my phone from my hand. I gasped, fumbling to grab it, but he was too quick. His expression remained infuriatingly calm. "No calls," he said softly. My heart hammered. The situation had escalated from weird to dangerous in seconds. I tried to unbuckle my seatbelt, but it jammed as if the mechanism was stuck or damaged. Desperate, I reached forward, clawing at the front seat, hoping to unlock the door. He shoved me back with surprising strength, his face twisting with a flicker of anger. "Stay put," he growled, "or this gets worse." A million thoughts raced through my mind. Should I scream? Would anyone hear me in this desolate place? I tried kicking the window, but the angle was awkward. The driver threw the car into park and got out, slamming his door. My breath caught in my throat as I watched him walk around to my side, disappearing into the darkness for a moment. I frantically yanked at my seatbelt. It wouldn't budge. The child lock mocked me. The only way out was through the front, but I'd have to crawl over in a hurry. Summoning courage, I lunged forward, scrambling for the driver's seat. But just then, the rear door flew open, and he grabbed me by the shoulder, yanking me back. Fear exploded in my chest. I kicked blindly, catching his knee, causing him to grunt in pain. He responded by tightening his grip, pulling me halfway out of the car. The seatbelt dug into my waist. "Stop!" I cried, tears burning my eyes. "Let me go!" He said nothing, just wrestled me free of the seatbelt, then dragged me onto the gravel. My knees scraped against the rough ground. The rain intensified, soaking both of us as he forced me to stand. I looked around in wild desperation. There was no sign of civilization, just trees and darkness. "Why are you doing this?" I managed, my voice breaking. He gave me that same eerie half-smile. "You'll see soon." My adrenaline soared. I spotted my phone clutched in his left hand, the screen cracked but still glowing faintly. If I could just get it back, maybe I could call for help. I steadied myself, then twisted my body, driving my elbow into his ribcage with every ounce of force I had. He let out a pained grunt, his grip slackened. I seized that instant to lunge for my phone, prying it from his fingers. My heart hammered as I turned to run, the gravel shifting under my feet. He recovered quickly, grabbing my jacket, but the fabric tore. I lost my balance and stumbled forward, phone slipping from my grip into the mud. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the twisted expression on his face. He lunged again, tackling me to the ground. In the scuffle, I managed to knee him in the groin. He hissed in pain, momentarily loosening his hold. Scrambling free, I spotted a faint glow where my phone had landed. I crawled through the mud, ignoring the sting of rocks digging into my palms. I reached out, snatching the phone. My fingers fumbled as I attempted to press the emergency call button. He was on me again before I could complete the call, his weight crushing me into the soggy ground. I heard the phone land a few feet away, the screen flickering. It felt like all the air had been knocked from my lungs. His hand pressed over my mouth, muffling my screams. Lightning flashed again, thunder shaking the sky. In that brief flash, I saw something that gave me a spark of hope. A pair of headlights cresting a distant hill, illuminating the roadside. A car was approaching on the main road not too far away. Summoning every shred of strength, I bit down on his palm. He yelped, jerking his hand away. I let out the loudest scream I could muster. The headlights in the distance seemed to waver, and I prayed they'd notice something was wrong. A figure on a side road struggling in the mud. From the corner of my eye, I saw him glance at the approaching lights, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Then, to my surprise, he released me, stumbling to his feet. For a moment he hovered there, as if deciding whether to run or silence me permanently. The car on the main road slowed, its headlights sweeping across the trees. He made his choice. He dashed back to the silver sedan, jumped in, and floored it, gravel spraying. Within seconds, the red taillights vanished around a bend. I lay there panting, soaked, and shaking. The other car's headlights caught me in their beam. A window rolled down, and a frantic voice yelled, "Are you okay?" I stumbled forward, tears streaming, trying to form words. They pulled over, and a man and woman rushed out, helping me to my feet. Through sobs, I told them what happened, showed them my phone with the half-dialed 911 call. We completed the call, and they stayed with me until the police arrived. In the aftermath, the police took my statement, launched a search for the silver sedan, and promised to contact the rideshare company for the driver's info. But the app logs showed something strange. The ride had been canceled just minutes after it began. The account used was newly created, tied to a fake name and untraceable payment method. It was as if he'd planned to vanish into thin air. For weeks, I stayed at a friend's place, terrified he'd find me again. Nightmares plagued me, Dreams of that smile in the rearview mirror, the pounding rain, the seatbelt trapping me. The police never found him, and the rideshare company apologized profusely, offering a lifetime of free rides that I'd never, ever use. I bought my own car soon after. The thought of stepping into a stranger's vehicle again made my skin crawl. Even regular taxis felt risky. Sometimes, while driving at night, I catch myself looking in the rear view, half expecting to see him sitting in the back seat, smiling. They say there are always risks with ride shares, that you should check the license plate, confirm the driver's name. I did all of that, and it didn't save me. Because he wasn't who he claimed to be. He was something else entirely, lurking behind a fabricated profile, waiting to pick me up. And every time I remember the way he said, "You're not my first passenger tonight," I can't help but wonder, how many others came before me, and how many after? He liked every post, but I never told him where I was. I'll admit it, I'm a social media addict. I love posting updates, pictures of my lunch, random thoughts throughout the day. My profiles are fairly public, but I never worried too much about online strangers. Sure, there are trolls, but how bad could it really get? One day I noticed a new friend request from someone named Michael Evans. His profile picture was a tasteful black and white selfie, and his profile listed a nearby city. We had no mutual friends, which was odd, but I shrugged and accepted. I had a habit of collecting online acquaintances like souvenirs. At first, Michael seemed harmless. He liked my posts, occasionally commented something nice or encouraging. I barely paid attention, accustomed to random online interactions. But over time, his engagement ramped up. He liked every single post of mine, sometimes within seconds of me uploading it. It was a little off-putting, but not alarming. Then I started noticing his comments felt personal. If I posted a photo from a cafe, he'd comment, "That place has the best espresso." If I tagged myself at a park, he'd chime in, "I was there yesterday. Beautiful weather." It was as though he was mirroring my activities, but I never actually saw him in person. One weekend, I decided to try a new brunch spot downtown. I didn't tag the location, wanting to unplug and savor my meal, but within minutes of posting a generic photo of my eggs and coffee, I got a comment from Michael. "Is that Baxter's on Main? Great choice." My heart skipped. How does he know? I had carefully angled the photo so there were no identifying features. I hadn't tagged anything. It was just a plate of food and a corner of the table. Yet Michael guessed the restaurant right away. A cold prickle of unease ran down my spine. He liked every post, but I never told him where I was. I tried to shrug it off. Maybe he recognized the style of plate or something. But then other coincidences piled up. If I posted a selfie from my living room, he'd comment, "Love that lamp in the background," as though he knew exactly where I was sitting. If I posted at a friend's apartment, he'd say something like, "Nice place, familiar." I started limiting my posts, making them more vague, but he still always seemed to know. One night as I left a movie theater, I posted a quick status update about the film. No location, just my thoughts. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a comment from Michael. "Wish I'd known you were at the Strand. I would have said hi." Goosebumps erupted on my arms. I hadn't mentioned the Strand nor posted any pictures. It felt like he was physically following me, not just virtually. I texted a friend, confiding in her about the weirdness. She suggested I block him and set my profile to private. I did exactly that, feeling a rush of relief at taking action. But the next morning, a new account popped up, Mike E. Same black and white photo, same city listed. The friend request came with a message, "You can't hide from me." I stared at the screen, dread coiling in my stomach. For the next few days, I ignored it, leaving the request unaccepted. No new messages arrived. I hoped maybe he'd give up, but then I posted a group photo from a friend's birthday dinner. Again, no location tags. A moment later, I got a DM from another new account. "Looking good in the red dress tonight." My blood ran cold. I was indeed wearing a red dress, but the photo was from the shoulders up. No way to see the color of my outfit. And tonight suggested he'd seen me in real time. I deleted the photo, heart pounding. I sat down that evening and systematically blocked every suspicious account I could find, changed my passwords, set all my profiles to the highest privacy settings. I even changed my display name to something obscure. For a while, it seemed to work. Silence. No creepy comments, no new friend requests. Then one day, a friend tagged me in a post, a group picture from a local coffee shop. Moments later, she texted me frantically. "Some guy named Michael just commented asking about you. He said he misses your posts. Are you okay?" I felt a surge of panic. He was finding me through other people's tags. That night, I purged my friends list, removing anyone I didn't know personally, and asked close friends not to tag me anymore. Most understood my concern. A few found it dramatic, but respected my wishes. For a while, I lived cautiously. I stopped sharing personal details online. No more location tags, no more real-time posts. If I did share something, it was hours or days after the fact. My social media turned into a bland timeline of random thoughts and old photos. Gradually, I started to feel safer. Maybe he'd moved on. But then a new message arrived. It was a direct email to my rarely used address, one I'd never shared publicly. The subject line, "Found you." The body of the email contained a recent photo of me from outside my apartment building, taken at night, presumably without my knowledge. Horror punched me in the gut. He knew where I lived. I hadn't posted my address or any exterior shots of the building. Yet there I was, captured in grainy detail, unlocking my front door. I called the police, choking back tears as I explained the situation. They took down the info, said they'd look into it, but admitted it would be difficult to trace an anonymous email. Paranoia consumed me. I started looking over my shoulder whenever I left my apartment. Sometimes I thought I spotted someone lingering across the street, but when I looked again, they vanished. I didn't sleep well, constantly jolting awake at the slightest noise. A few days later, I received another email from the same address. This time, it was just a single sentence. "I'll see you soon." Attached was a screenshot of my friend's private birthday party invitation, a digital invite she'd only sent to a handful of trusted people. My name was on the guest list. He somehow had access to it. I alerted my friend, who was equally freaked out. We considered canceling the party, but she insisted on hiring security instead, not letting this creep ruin the celebration. I was on edge the entire night, scanning the room for any sign of him. Halfway through the party, I slipped outside for some fresh air, heart hammering with anxiety. The security guard stood by the entrance, eyes peeled. I leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. A new email. "Nice dress, this time it's black, right?" My breath caught. I looked around in alarm, searching the street. Cars cruised by, pedestrians strolled along the sidewalk. Someone across the street was lighting a cigarette. Another person walked a dog. No obvious sign of Michael. But he had to be close enough to see me. I hurried back inside, alerted security, and the guard accompanied me around the block, searching every possible hiding spot. We found no one matching Michael's description, or at least the photo I had of him. Frustrated and scared, I decided to leave the party early. The guard insisted on walking me to my car, which was parked in a nearby lot. As we approached my car, headlights from a parked vehicle suddenly flared to life. A dark SUV revved its engine. I spotted a black and white profile picture taped to the passenger window. Michael's face. The SUV sped off before we could react, tires screeching. The guard tried to take note of the plate, but it was obscured by mud. I filed yet another report with the police. They took the security guard's statement, but there was little else to go on. Michael Evans, if that was even his real name, was a ghost, appearing and disappearing at will. I stopped posting online altogether. My once busy social media accounts went dormant. Friends thought I was overreacting or punishing myself, but I didn't care. I needed to disappear digitally, hoping he'd lose interest. Eventually, the emails slowed, then stopped. Weeks turned into months without a single message. I wanted to believe it was over, but a nagging doubt lingered. Even now, I occasionally get a friend request from a suspicious profile. A bland name, a black and white photo, no mutual friends. I never accept. And each time, a trickle of dread seeps into my stomach. Could it be him? Trying again? I've considered changing my name, moving to another state, but I can't let fear dictate my entire life. Instead, I live with hypervigilance. My social media remains private and minimal. I watch for anyone loitering near my apartment, If I sense someone behind me on the street, I step aside, let them pass. I keep my phone's camera ready to snap a photo if I see anything suspicious, all because a stranger on the internet decided to fixate on me, liking every post, knowing every location, but never revealing himself in a way I could trace. Sometimes, in those dark moments before sleep, I recall his ominous email. "I'll see you soon." And I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for the perfect moment to reappear. Or perhaps he's already standing nearby, phone in hand, watching my every move. The farmer smiled and said, "No one ever leaves the farmhouse, not really." It was supposed to be a restful weekend getaway, a cozy farmhouse rental I'd booked on a whim after seeing glowing reviews online. My partner Amy and I drove through rolling hills and scenic back roads, eventually arriving at a picturesque property surrounded by tall fields of corn. A quaint red barn stood behind the main house, and a weathered sign out front read, "Welcome to Willow Creek Farm." We parked on a gravel driveway, stepped out to a burst of fresh country air. The farmhouse itself was 2 stories of rustic charm, white clapboard siding, a wraparound porch, and flower boxes under each window. An older man with a straw hat and a warm smile greeted us at the front steps. "You folks must be the weekend renters," he said. "Name's Carl. I own this place." He extended a hand, which I shook. Something in his eyes gleamed with a certain intensity, but I shrugged it off as rustic friendliness. Carl showed us inside, pointing out the antique furniture, the polished wood floors, and the bedrooms upstairs. Everything looked as lovely as the photos, maybe even better. The kitchen was stocked with fresh produce, presumably grown on the farm, and a handwritten note welcomed us, inviting us to explore the grounds. After giving us the key, Carl lingered for a moment at the door. "You two enjoy yourselves," he said. "Just remember, if you go wandering after dark, be careful by the barn. We keep it locked up for a reason." Something about the way he said it made me uneasy, but I nodded, forcing a smile, and he departed, the screen door creaking shut behind him. Amy and I spent the afternoon marveling at the open fields, snapping pictures of the big sky, feeding a few hens that pecked around a small coop. The atmosphere was serene, no traffic noise, no stress. We planned to have a barbecue on the back patio that evening, then cozy up by the fireplace. As twilight fell, we prepared dinner. But just as we started the grill, the lights flickered and went out. The entire house plunged into darkness. I found a flashlight and checked the breaker box, but everything seemed in order. Strange. Amy stepped onto the porch, shining her phone's flashlight toward the barn. She thought she saw a dim lantern glow coming from inside, bobbing as though someone was moving around. We considered going to investigate, but Carl's warning echoed in my mind. I decided we should wait until morning, maybe call him if the power didn't return soon. We ate a quick meal by candlelight, the mood shifting from charming to slightly eerie. Something about that dark barn, the flickering lantern light, set me on edge. Around 10 p.m., the lights suddenly roared back to life on their own, making us both jump. We laughed it off as farm quirks, maybe a faulty generator. That night, as we settled into bed, I heard a distant, rhythmic creaking sound. It reminded me of a rocking chair slowly tipping back and forth. I tried to ignore it, attributing it to old house noises. But Amy couldn't sleep, so we decided to investigate, just to ease our minds. We found a narrow door in the kitchen that led to a small attic space above the pantry. Inside, there was indeed a rocking chair, gently swaying as if recently touched. No open windows, no draft. I placed a hand on it, feeling a faint warmth, almost as if someone had just been sitting there. I glanced at Amy and we both shivered. In the morning, Carl showed up unannounced, carrying a basket of fresh eggs. He wore the same friendly smile. Over coffee, Amy casually mentioned the barn light. Carl's expression didn't waver. "Must have been the wind," he said, which made no sense for a lantern. Then he added something that sent a chill through me. "No one ever leaves the farmhouse. Not really, you'll see." He chuckled after saying it, but neither of us laughed. His words lingered in my mind all day as Amy and I roamed the property. We found an old well with a rotted wooden cover. Beyond that, a neglected orchard with trees covered in strangling vines. The more we explored, the more the idyllic facade showed cracks, broken tools, half buried in the dirt. rickety fences that seemed to mark off sections of land for no clear reason. Late that afternoon, Amy noticed a small cemetery behind the orchard, a cluster of weathered headstones with dates spanning over a century. One name repeated on several markers, Carl A. Wilson, each with different birth dates but suspiciously similar death dates. A sense of foreboding crept over me. Could they all be ancestors with the same name? The latest marker read Carl A. Wilson, 1973, but the death date was chiseled out, incomplete. A prickling unease settled in my stomach. Amy tried calling a friend to chat about our weird discoveries, but there was no cell service. We joked half-heartedly about it being a classic horror setup. Yet behind the jokes, real anxiety bubbled. That evening, we approached the barn before sunset, determined to see what was inside. The large doors were padlocked. Peering through the cracks between the boards, we saw only darkness. The faint smell of decay wafted out. Amy wrinkled her nose, suggesting maybe it was just old hay. We returned to the house for dinner. As night fell, a thick fog rolled in, cloaking the farm in eerie stillness. Right around 9 p.m., the lights flickered and died again. This time they didn't come back. We lit candles, huddling in the living room. The soft glow danced across the walls, making shadows loom larger. A sudden knock at the front door made us both jump. We found Carl on the porch, lantern in hand, face partially hidden by the brim of his straw hat. "Power troubles again?" he asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Let's have a look." Despite our protests, he wandered from room to room, humming to himself. When he reached the attic door, he paused. "No need to go in there," he said flatly. "Let's check the basement instead." Amy and I exchanged worried glances. We followed him to the basement door. It creaked open, revealing a flight of stone steps descending into darkness. Something about it felt off, like stepping into a tomb. Carl led the way with his lantern, casting wavering light on damp walls. At the bottom, we found an array of old farm tools, some rusted, some disturbingly well-maintained. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, unlit. Carl fiddled with a fuse box, muttering to himself. Amy hovered near the stairs, clearly uneasy. I took a step closer to an old wooden workbench, noticing a row of mason jars. Each jar contained what looked like black sludge, or maybe it was just mold. Suddenly, Carl turned, the lantern illuminating his features in a stark glow. His polite smile stretched unnaturally wide. "We don't often get visitors who stay the night," he said, voice low. "But the ones who do tend to stay longer." My pulse quickened. Something was very wrong. Amy stepped back, trying to retreat up the stairs. Carl's arm shot out with surprising speed, grabbing her wrist. His expression hardened. "You can't leave now," he murmured. "No one ever leaves the farmhouse. Not really." A cold wave of terror washed over me. Amy yanked her arm free, and we both bolted for the stairs. Carl lunged, but we scrambled up before he could grab us again. Slamming the basement door, we shoved a heavy cabinet in front of it. From below, we heard him pounding, shouting words we couldn't fully make out, but the door held. Our minds raced. We had to get out. No time to pack. The sky outside was pitch black, the fog thick. We sprinted to the front door, only to find it locked from the outside with some hefty latch. Windows were similarly secured, nailed shut. Carl must have prepared for this. Panic rose in my throat. We ran to the kitchen, hoping there might be a back entrance. The door there was padlocked as well. Adrenaline spiked. We're trapped. The pounding from the basement stairs grew louder. We had moments before Carl found another way up. Desperate, we grabbed a cast-iron skillet and a kitchen knife. Then from upstairs came a series of thumps like heavy footsteps. My blood turned to ice. Is someone else in the house? Without any other option, we decided to break a window. Amy smashed the kitchen window with the skillet. The glass shattered outward. Fog curled in like a living thing. We both started crawling through, ignoring the shards that sliced our arms. A deafening crash came from the hallway. Carl, or whoever was upstairs, must have broken through. We half tumbled onto the porch roof, sliding down to the ground. The wet grass beneath our feet felt like salvation. We dashed toward our car, hearts pounding. The gravel driveway glimmered in the moonlight. but the car wouldn't start. The engine clicked, refusing to turn over. In a frenzy, Amy popped the hood only to find wires slashed. We cursed, scanning for another vehicle. Carl's old truck was nowhere in sight, probably behind the barn. From somewhere in the distance, we heard an inhuman wail, followed by the pounding of footsteps on the porch boards. With no other choice, we sprinted away from the house, cutting through fields of tall corn stalks that rustled ominously. We navigated by faint moonlight, stumbling over roots and uneven ground. Behind us, the farmhouse glowed with candlelight in an upper window. Shadows moved across it like dancing silhouettes. Eventually, we found a dirt road. We followed it for what felt like miles, lungs burning, hearts racing. Finally, we reached a paved county highway, where we flagged down a passing truck. The driver, wide-eyed at our disheveled appearance, gave us a lift to the nearest gas station. From there, we called the police. Officers escorted us back to the farmhouse the next day, but Carl was gone. No trace of him, nor any sign of forced entry in the basement. The padlocks we'd seen were mysteriously absent. The officers looked skeptical as we recounted our story. One of them even suggested we'd overreacted to a power outage and an eccentric farmer. We never retrieved our car. It was gone when we returned. The police concluded it had been stolen, probably towed by Carl. They opened an investigation, but as far as I know, they never found him. Online, the rental listing vanished. Reviews disappeared, as though Willow Creek Farm had never existed. To this day, I can't shake the memory of Carl's words, whispered in that damp basement. No one ever leaves the farmhouse, not really. Sometimes I have nightmares of that moment, his lantern lighting up his face, revealing eyes that seemed older than the man himself. I don't know who or what he was, or how many victims fell prey to that isolated property. All I know is that we escaped by sheer luck, leaving behind a place where the ordinary charm of rustic life was a mask for something far darker. And I wonder if others stumble upon Willow Creek Farm, whether they'll be able to leave it all.